Cold water immersion is one of the easiest and most impactful ways of improving your health and well-being. And so in this video, I'll share with you the top 11 health benefits of cold plunging that are supported by research as well as my personal anecdotal experience with cold plunging over the past couple of years. I'm going to share with you how to get started with cold plunging even if you don't own a tub. One of the most important factors, I would argue, of cold water immersion that many people don't consider, but that's crucial to really get most, if not all, of the benefits from your cold plunging. So let's start with the benefits first. Number one, and this is really a very easy one to figure out. You don't even need to read any scientific evidence or talk to scientists to figure out that this is a clear benefit, and that is it increases your energy levels. Just jump into cold water, ideally submerge your head, and you'll realize the jolt of energy that you're getting from doing that. And that's because exposing yourself to very cold water puts you into fight or flight mode. It causes the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine, all of those hormones that get released when you're in a situation where your brain thinks you have to either run away from danger or you have to fight it. Brain doesn't know that you're intentionally exposing yourself to freezing cold, potentially deadly temperatures. And so you get all of those hormones floating through your body, and it just makes you alert. And that effect not only occurs while you're in the cold and shortly after, that can actually persist for many, many hours. I remember when I did my first cold plunge, for the rest of the day, I felt this alertness and mental clarity and overall improved energy. And it just felt so good that I'm like, I gotta make this a part of my regular routine. And so that's one of the ways. If you're sluggish in the morning, or if you're someone who gets, usually with a slow start, jumping into cold water, in a cold shower for that matter, in the morning is gonna give it a jolt of energy that'll persist you for at least a good portion of the day. And that's one of the key benefits that you can harvest immediately. It's not something where you have to do it for an extended period before you see benefits. You get that immediate. Number two, exposing yourself to very cold temperatures triggers hormesis and builds resilience. That's really one of my favorite benefits, because maybe let's define hormesis real quick. That's the idea of exposing yourself to mild stressors that causes your body to become stronger and more resilient so you can face those stressors more favorably in the future. An analogy for that would be weightlifting. If you lift weight, your muscles grow and get stronger because your body says, well, we have this resistance here and we're struggling with it, so we need to grow more muscle tissue so we can do it more easily. And the same is with cold. Now, instead of growing muscle tissue, exposing yourself to cold temperatures in a tub in particular over a course of time causes the activation of brown fat tissue. And that activation not only leads to an increased thermogenesis and energy expenditure. In other words, your body can keep you warm even without shivering. And that is the advantage, that if it gets cold outside, you feel less cold. I've noticed that ever since I started cold plunging, that I'm just less cold, especially in winter, when I'm not, bundled up in a million layers. I can go outside and I feel fine because I have brown fat tissue that creates energy in the form of, heat, and my body keeps burning, energy to create that heat. So it's also beneficial for burning fat, if that's your thing, or if that's one of the goals you're after. So you can burn more body fat and you stay warmer. And in addition to that, the cold water immersion also bolsters mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning the creation of new mitochondria, which means more energy and improved overall resilience. And I really like that. That's one of my favorite benefits of cold plunging. Number three is that cold plunging can speed up physical recovery. Now, there are some nuance to that. A lot of people think that, well, it's a good idea to get into the cold right after exercise so you can improve recovery. I personally actually think that exposing yourself to heat after workout in the form of sauna bathing or red light therapy or whatever is actually more beneficial for recovery, but you can combine it with cold to get this, contraction of your blood vessels, and that leads then to improved blood flow and to improved recovery. Now, here's the nuance to that. If you're, let's say, a CrossFit athlete and you have back-to-back workouts, going into the cold in between is certainly beneficial to get the pump out, to get some of that blood out of your muscles so they are not all blown up and you don't feel like you have this huge pump and you can barely move. So in that case, yes, it can speed up the recovery between workouts, but at the end of the day, so to say, I would actually actually do hot and cold or just hot instead of just the ice bath. What I like to do with ice bathing in relation to physical exercise is to pre-cool, to actually go into the cold before I exercise. And the benefit of that is that you pre-cool your mitochondria, meaning that, one of the reasons why we fatigue when we work out is because the mitochondria overheats. It's one of the reasons. It's not the only factor, but it's one of the factors, the overheating of mitochondria, so it cannot pump out more ATP at the same rate. And if you pre-cool your mitochondria by jumping into an ice bath before you work out, then you actually have more leeway, more time before you overheat, and so you can perform better. And the second benefit of pre-cooling, what it's called, is that it can boost your testosterone levels. And so that's the reason why I usually jump into the cold plunge before I do my CrossFit workouts. And some people are concerned that, well, you're not warmed up properly, your risk of injury goes up. I've not seen that happen at all. I just go through my regular warm-up routine, but I've noticed that I can sustain my performance for longer by pre-cooling, and that's yet another benefit of cold plunging. Number 5, I think we have now, is that it helps you manage stress and improves discipline. And the reason again for that is when you jump into the cold water, many people, especially if they're not used to it, they freak out. They're like in this fight or flight response where they need to get out. And the thing here is, if you learn how to control your breathing, if you control your stress response by breathing slowly through your nose and intentionally, you can then train your body to do the same thing in other stressful situations that do not involve cold water. So in other words, you learn how to deal with incredibly stressful situations by calming down, by breathing slowly, by slowing down your breathing, and you can apply then the same thing to any situation that life might throw at you. And the second nuance that is, it takes discipline to get into the cold water, especially when it's cold outside and I walk down to my cold plunge and it's below freezing outside already, and I have to, take off my jacket and then jump into water that's equally freezing. It just takes a lot of discipline to do this. But if you manage to do that, if you learn how to be disciplined enough to get into the cold, despite what you know about how uncomfortable it is, then you can apply the same principle, the same discipline to anything else in life. And that's again one of the main reasons why I cold plunge regularly, so I can learn how to overcome the initial shock or fight or flight response when I'm in a very stressful situation and maintain mental discipline to just pull through it and do it in a way that's calm and controlled. Number 6, cold plunging can actually boost your mood. And that's again related to neurotransmitters and chemicals that get released when you jump into the cold, like dopamine and serotonin. And there are a lot of studies out there where participants reported an increased alertness and reduced negative emotions following cold water immersion. I've noticed the same when I jump in, even if something is upsetting me, I'm angry with, I don't know, a funny comment on YouTube because someone didn't like my videos or whatever, like that one person who says that I'm a scammer because I promote the benefits of cold water exposure. By jumping into the cold water, then actually I come out and I feel calm and at peace because of those chemicals in my brain, in my bloodstream, and because I've overcome a challenging situation, and it just makes you feel good. And you have this profound sense of accomplishment and elevated mood that can set the tone for the rest of the day. So especially if you do cold plunging in the morning. Number 7, cold water immersion can improve your cardiovascular health. And that's again, when you get into the cold, your blood vessels in your extremities constrict because all the blood is redirected to your vital organs to keep them warm while you're in the cold water. And of course, then once you get out, your blood vessels start dilating again, especially if you allow your body to warm up slowly and you get like this cardiovascular workout. And especially that contraction, it's kind of the same when you work out, when you do resistance training or weightlifting, you contract your muscles, and then when you're done, everything is, relaxed again. And it's the same idea with your cardiovascular system, where you want your blood vessels to constrict, to tighten up, and then let go again. It's a great exercise that can improve your lipid profiles, reduce arterial plaque formation, and many, many other things that studies have shown can be easily achieved by regularly exposing yourself to incredibly and uncomfortably cold temperatures. Number 8, cold plunging can also improve sleep. And there is again some nuance to that. The thing is, when you get into cold water and stay in the cold water for a couple of minutes, your core body temperature can actually drop. And so some people think that, or some people know that you can only fall asleep when your core temperature temperature drops a little bit. And so the idea is, well, if I cold plunge before and my core temperature drops, then I can fall asleep quicker. But that's actually not entirely true, because I mean, it is true, but the thing really is, once you get into the cold and your core temperature drops, your body is trying to do everything then to raise your temperature again. And so if you get out and if you cold plunge close to bedtime, that can actually lead then to a temporary increase in core temperature as your body kind of overshoots, what it's trying to do to get your temperature back to baseline. And so you might actually have a harder time falling asleep. It could also be that you're so revved up from the cold plunge that you have trouble falling asleep, because there are still, epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol maybe in your bloodstream. And so it can be counterproductive. But if you do it wisely, if you use cold plunging and especially if you've gotten used to the cold plunging a little bit, and you really use it as a time to meditate, if you don't stay in too long so your core temperature doesn't significantly drop, if you just use it in a meditative kind of purpose where you slow down, where you intentionally relax in the cold and give in, that can then be very much helpful to improve your sleep. And what we typically do is, when we go into the cold plunge, we don't stay in for several minutes. We typically do it only for maybe a minute, 45 seconds to kind of help me calm down or help us calm down and relax. As funny as it sounds, but you can actually relax in a cold tub and then get out and have like this cold aura around you that can then in fact help you fall asleep quicker. And we've noticed that. Number 9, and I've kind of mentioned it before already, but cold plunging can help you burn fat and improve insulin sensitivity. Now, as I mentioned before, cold water exposure, if you do it consistently over a couple of weeks, it can activate brown fat tissue or brown adipose tissue. And that's important because that increases your caloric expenditure and that aids in fat loss. So without you doing anything else, you burn more fat because that brown fat tissue is trying to keep you warm, and so that helps you burn fat and extra calories. Also, the shivering that you experience if you stay in long enough, that can also help you burn energy, because shivering requires energy, and as you shiver, you burn extra calories, and that can help you with burning fat. But more importantly, I think, than those two factors are some of the metabolic enhancements that you experience with regular cold plunging, like improved insulin sensitivity. That's incredibly important, because the more sensitive your cells are to the signals of the hormone insulin, the better you can control your blood sugar, the better you can burn fat, and the more efficient overall your metabolism is working. And so that's one of the core things of improving your overall health, is to remain as sensitive as possible to insulin. If you get insulin resistance, that's really the beginning of many of the metabolic and chronic diseases we deal with today, be it Alzheimer's, cancer, stroke, diabetes obviously is a big one. All of those go back to insulin issues, and if you can improve your insulin sensitivity, you can significantly reduce the risk of developing any of those chronic diseases. It strengthens your immune system, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that cold water immersion elevates the production of antioxidants like glutathione, and also it causes the release of so-called cold shock proteins, and those support the immune system and cause an increased count of white blood cells. And so all of that combined means your immune system works more efficiently and is more robust, and that decreases your chances of getting sick. I've noticed, my wife too, the more we stick to our cold plunging routine, the less we get sick. Obviously, there are other factors like stress management, diet, sleep hygiene, etc., that are involved in immune system regulation, gut health, etc. But everything else being equal, if you expose yourself to cold temperatures very often, then the chances of getting sick are significantly reduced, because your immune system is just better and more effective of handling whatever is going on, whatever pathogens you might get exposed to. And the last one, cold water immersion triggers, again, or through the triggering of cold shock proteins, can actually be protective of brain cells. In other words, it offers neurocognitive benefits. And there is one type of cold shock protein, it's called RBM3, that has been shown, albeit in animal studies, to promote synapse regeneration and prevent neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now, those studies have been done in mice, so not all of that might translate to human physiology, but based on the studies that are out there, that RBM3 or the increasing RBM3 levels via cold exposure prevent brain degeneration and improve cognitive function. So that's just another benefit of those cold shock proteins in addition to directly supporting your immune system. Now, are there potential risks and considerations when you start cold plunging? Yes, obviously, there are some potential issues. If you have high blood pressure already, jumping into the cold, causing that vasoconstriction, can further increase your blood pressure. So if you have hypertension, gotta be careful, talk to your doctor and make sure it's safe for you. There's also a risk of hypothermia. Don't get carried away by trying to stay in longer than your body or longer than the guy on YouTube or whatever. It's a very personalized experience. You want to stay in there long enough so your experience may be mild shivering. You want to choose a tub or a water that's cold enough so you get that initial shock response, but there is no need of overdoing it. You don't have to stay in there for 15 minutes. Usually, in a nutshell, 2 to 4 minutes are all you need to get most of the benefits. If you start shivering, it's time to get out. I would always recommend cold plunging in the presence of another adult. So if you need help or assistance or whatever, maybe you freak out, like my wife, when the first time she did it, she was almost like getting a panic attack and thought that I would not be strong enough to lift her 110-pound body out of the tub. Even though I can deadlift over 500 pounds. But, in that moment where she was freaking out, you want to have someone close by who can assist you. And so I would recommend not doing that alone by yourself. Now, getting started with cold plunging, what do you need? Ideally, you have a tub. But if you don't, taking cold showers, especially in winter, and especially if you live in a state where tap water is not 70 degrees year round, like if you're in Florida, taking cold showers is probably not going to work. But in most other regions in the United States, cold showers can be incredibly effective and incredibly challenging at the same time, especially in winter when the water temperature naturally drops. And so just taking a 1 to 2 minute cold shower and getting that initial shock response. So instead of starting hot and then gradually turning it down, to cold, turn it up cold and get in. You get that initial shock response, and chances are it's going to feel incredibly difficult for a little bit until you get used to it. And from there, you can graduate to a tub. Can be something cheap, inflatable, or something more robust, depending on what you need, what your budget is, how much space you have. I have a separate video on the best cold plunge tub, so check that out. And before we wrap up this video, I want to talk about something that's, I think, often overlooked, and that is contrast therapy. Same as like a lot of people, rave about the benefits of sauna bathing. There are a lot of people who rave about the benefits of cold plunge or cold water immersion. But the truth is, in those countries where both sauna bathing and cold plunging are common practice that have been done for a very long time, it's usually the combination of hot and cold and not just one of those two. And so I encourage you to consider contrast therapy instead of just doing one thing. And contrast therapy can mean you go into the hot sauna, then you into the cold, back into the hot, back into the cold. You end in cold usually, so you close your pores and you don't sweat like a pig once you put on your clothes. There are different modalities, obviously, but I think with combining the cold with the hot, you get even more benefits and more robust benefits, especially from a cardiovascular perspective, where your blood vessels dilate in the heat and then constrict in the cold, and you go back and forth, and it's like really that constriction and dilation that is a great workout for your blood vessels. You get the heat shock proteins in the sauna, you get the cold shock proteins. Both are immune boosting factors, so you really get more robust benefits from doing all of that. Now, I've been cold plunging and sauna bathing for that matter for a couple of years now. I absolutely love it. I swear by the benefits, and you can do it fairly inexpensively. You don't need to spend a lot of money. You don't need to buy expensive tubs. Depending on where you live, if you have a natural body of water that gets cold in winter, by all means, jump into that river, jump into that lake, and that's when you do your cold water exposure. And if you can only do it in winter, then only do it in winter, if that means not spending $1 on a tub. If you live in an area where it doesn't get that cold in winter, or if you want to do it year round, by all means, invest in a solid tub with a filtration system, with a chiller, etc. I have resources that can help you find the perfect one for your budget and for your needs. But let me know, have you experienced any specific benefits with cold water immersion? Are you thinking about implementing it and you just don't know exactly yet? Or do you think cold water immersion is all just a big scam and there are no benefits at all associated with that? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Subscribe, send this video to someone who could benefit from it, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.